What if I told you that somewhere along the coast of Nova Scotia, there's a road that doesn't appear on any map, yet locals have whispered about it for over 2 centuries? A road that, according to eyewitness accounts, only manifests itself every 27 years, stretching impossibly across the Atlantic waters to reach an island that shouldn't exist. This is the story of Phantom's Reach. And I warn you now, what you're about to hear will challenge everything. You thought you knew about the boundaries between our world and whatever lies beyond. In 1823, a fisherman named Tobias Blackwood was returning from his nets when he witnessed something that would haunt him until his dying day. The sun was setting over the water when suddenly, as if pulled from the very depths of the ocean itself, a cobblestone road began to rise from beneath the waves. Stone by stone, it climbed upward, defying every law of nature, creating a bridge that stretched toward a landmass that hadn't been there moments before. Blackwood described the island as shrouded in perpetual twilight, its shores lined with twisted trees that seemed to writhe against the sky. But most disturbing of all were the lights. Dozens of flickering candles, visible through the windows of what appeared to be a massive stone structure at the island's center. For 3 days, the road remained. Local authorities dismissed Blackwood's claims as the ravings of a man who'd spent too long at sea. But on the 4th day, both the road and the island vanished without a trace, leaving only disturbed water where they had stood. 20-7 years later, in 1850, it happened. Again, this time, there were multiple witnesses. A young woman named Margaret Hawthorne had been walking along the coastal path when she saw the road materialize. Unlike Blackwood, she decided to investigate. According to her journal, which was discovered decades later, hidden in the walls of her family home, she walked approximately half a mile along the stone pathway before her nerve failed her. In her own words, the stones beneath my feet were not stones at all, but seemed to pulse with a warmth that spoke of something alive. The closer I drew to the island, the more clearly I could hear them voices, dozens of voices, all speaking in unison. They were reciting names, endless lists of names, and with growing horror, I realized I recognized some of them. They were the names of people who had vanished from our village over the past century. Margaret fled back to shore, but her brief journey had lasting consequences. Within a month of her encounter, she began to change. Neighbors reported that she would stand at her window for hours, staring out at the water, her lips moving silently, as if reciting something. Her hair, once golden, turned completely white. Her eyes, once blue, became so pale, they appeared almost transparent. The most disturbing change, however, was her behavior during the full moon. According to testimonies from family members, Margaret would sleepwalk to the shore and stand waist deep in the freezing water, her arms outstretched toward the horizon, calling out names in a voice that wasn't entirely her own. She died in 1852, found drowned in her own well. Her final diary entry, written in handwriting that grew increasingly erratic, read, "They are calling me home. The island remembers. The island always remembers." The pattern continued. 1877, 1904, 1931. Every 27 years, without fail, the road would appear. And with each manifestation, someone would be brave enough or foolish enough to venture partway across. In 1931, it was a photographer named Samuel Morse. No relation to the inventor, Morse managed to take several photographs before the overwhelming sense of dread forced him to retreat. When he developed the images, they showed the island clearly, but there was something wrong with the stone building at its center. The structure appeared to be built entirely from human bones. Morse's photographs were dismissed as elaborate hoaxes, but the man himself was forever changed. He spent the remaining years of his life obsessively researching the history of the area, uncovering records that most would prefer to keep buried. What he discovered was that the island had a name in the old indigenous languages of the region, a name that roughly translated to the place where the hungry wait. According to oral traditions dating back centuries, the island was a kind of spiritual prison, a place where souls who had committed unspeakable acts in life were condemned to spend eternity. But here's where Morse's research took a darker turn. He discovered that throughout the region's history, there had been patterns of disappearances that coincided with the island's appearances. Not just random disappearances, but specifically people who had been involved in terrible crimes that had gone unpunished by human law. In 1796, a man named Cornelius Wade, suspected but never convicted of murdering his entire family, vanished the night before the road appeared. In 1824, a woman named Prudence Gill, who neighbors whispered had poisoned 3 husbands for their inheritance, disappeared during the island's manifestation. The pattern repeated with each cycle. Morse theorized that the island wasn't just a prison, it was actively recruiting. Somehow, it was calling to those who belonged there, drawing them across that impossible road to join whatever community existed in that twilight realm. The most recent confirmed sighting was in 1958. A group of teenagers, led by a boy named David Chen, decided they would be the first to actually reach the island. They had studied the historical accounts, prepared supplies, and waited for the road to appear. According to the sole survivor, a girl named Patricia Yates, they made it all the way across. The island, she said, was larger than it appeared from shore, covered in a thick mist that smelled of decay and old flowers. The bone structure at the center was indeed a building, a massive cathedral-like space with vaulted ceilings that seemed to stretch impossibly high. Inside, they found them. The missing people from throughout the centuries, standing in perfect rows like a congregation frozen in eternal prayer. Their eyes were gone, replaced by pools of that same pale light that flickered in the island's windows. They were all facing the same direction, toward an altar made from what, Patricia insisted, were children's skulls. But the most horrifying discovery wasn't the congregation of the damned, it was what stood behind the altar. A figure in tattered robes, tall enough that its head disappeared into the shadows above. When it spoke, Patricia said, its voice was composed of every scream that had ever echoed across the water. It told them they weren't supposed to be there yet. Their crimes weren't sufficient. Their souls weren't dark enough, but it made them an offer. They could stay and join the eternal service, or they could leave, but only one of them would be allowed to remember. The others would forget, but they would be marked. When their time came, when they had accumulated enough darkness in their souls, the road would appear for them personally. Patricia chose to remember. Her friends chose to forget. She watched as David, Michael, and Sarah walked back across the road with empty expressions, their memories of the island wiped clean. But she could see the mark, a small pale scar on each of their foreheads that pulsed with the same light as the island's windows. Over the following decades, Patricia tracked what happened to her friends. David became a successful businessman, but his success came at the cost of others. Financial schemes that destroyed families. Toxic waste dumped in poor neighborhoods. Michael became a doctor, but Patricia discovered evidence of unnecessary surgeries. Patients who died under suspicious circumstances. Sarah became a teacher, but there were whispers about students who went missing after staying late for extra help. One by one, they disappeared. David, in 1973, walking into the ocean during a business trip to Halifax. Michael, in 1981, found drowned in his own swimming pool despite being an excellent swimmer. Sarah, in 1987, vanishing from her locked classroom, leaving behind only wet footprints leading to the window. The island called them home. Patricia spent the rest of her life documenting everything, creating a record that she hoped would warn others, but she also lived with a terrible knowledge she had been marked to not for the crimes she might commit, but for the knowledge she carried. The island, she believed, couldn't allow someone to exist who knew its secrets and remained untainted. In 2012, Patricia Yates was found dead in her apartment in Montreal. She had drowned, though there was no water source large enough in her home to explain how. Her research, thousands of pages of documents, photographs, and testimonies, was donated to a local university. Most scholars who reviewed her work dismissed it as an elaborate work of fiction, but a few took notice, particularly Dr. Elena Vasquez, a professor of folklore and mythology. Dr. Vasquez had been studying similar phenomena around the world. places that appeared and disappeared according to their own mysterious schedules, always associated with judgment, punishment, and the settlement of cosmic debts. She theorized that the island represents something primal in human consciousness, a physical manifestation of our collective understanding that some crimes are so terrible they transcend mortal justice. But her research led her to a disturbing conclusion. The island's appearances were becoming more frequent. The 27-year cycle, once absolute, began to shorten. 1958 to 1979, 21 years. 1979 to 1996, 17 years. 1996 to 2008, 12 years. 2008 to 2016, only 8 years. Dr. Vasquez believed that the island was adapting, responding to changes in human society. As populations grew and crimes became more frequent and more heinous, the island needed to collect souls more often to maintain some kind of cosmic balance. Her final paper, published just before her own mysterious disappearance in 2020, contained a chilling prediction. Based on the accelerating pattern, she calculated that the next appearance should have occurred in 2021. When it didn't, she theorized that the island might have found a new method of collection, one that didn't require the dramatic appearance of the road. Perhaps, she suggested, it had learned to call its chosen directly, appearing only to them in their final moments. This would explain the increasing number of unexplained drownings along the Nova Scotia coast. People found in impossible places with expressions of terrible recognition on their faces. The local government, understandably, prefers to keep these theories quiet. Tourism is important to the region, and stories of supernatural judgment islands tend to discourage vacation bookings. But the whispers persist, passed down through families who have lived in the area for generations. They say that on certain nights, when the moon is dark and the water is still, you can see lights flickering on the horizon where no land should be. They say that if you listen carefully to the sound of the waves, you can hear voices reciting names. And they say that if you hear your own name called from across the water, you should run, because the island remembers everything. Every secret sin, every hidden cruelty, every act that human law couldn't touch but cosmic justice cannot ignore. And sooner or later, everyone's debt comes due. The most terrifying aspect of this story isn't whether the island exists. It's the possibility that it doesn't need to. Perhaps the real horror is simpler. The knowledge that somewhere, somehow, our worst actions are being recorded, catalogued, and judged by forces beyond our understanding. In the end, whether phantoms reach is real or simply a manifestation of collective guilt doesn't matter. What matters is the question it forces us to confront when that final road appears before us. Will we be among those called to cross it, or will we be among those watching from the shore, grateful that our names weren't on the list? The island that appears at the end of a single road may be nothing more than legend. But legends, as any folklorist will tell you, survive because they contain truths too terrible for history books. And sometimes, late at night when the water is still and the horizon seems closer than it should, even skeptics find themselves listening for voices they hope never to hear. After all, the island remembers. The island always remembers, and if the patterns hold true, if Dr. Vasquez's calculations were correct, then somewhere along the coast of Nova Scotia, someone is already walking a road that shouldn't exist, following lights that beckon from beyond the edge of the world. The only question remaining is, will they be walking alone?